recommendations we have, are we going to get into that kind of advocacy from the commission?
To answer the question, yes, the commission is working on that level of advocacy, and we've had the subject matter experts that I mentioned in various areas and segments, from leasing to all those financial services and the administration to appraisals. We've had panels and panels of folks that are not only looking at those past efforts, but getting a firm pulse on today's state of how things are operating. And we've been asking the questions along the line of what happened with those previous recommendations. We've mentioned the intertribal organizations, as well as NCDI and others who've had resolutions from 1994 to present, and we recognize that it ebbs and flows. At some point, leadership gets together and says there's a real problem here, and so there's a resolution or there's a congressional oversight hearing on whatever's happening. So we asked Grant Thornton to take a look at those efforts and what happened with those recommendations, and we're also aware that OST has this annual performance review. So their initial and primary responsibility was to be this oversight body that Congress put in place. So it's looking at those past efforts, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel and just have another study, but we wanted to take that whole body of work, plus impaneling subject matter experts for current situations, and then to be able to deliver those recommendations, as you point out, in an advocacy type role, and a connection with the buyback program. And I can speak, the last few meetings we've had, the primary issues around that has to do with the budget. We know there's $285 million set aside for implementing the buyback program. We know that last year there was a $14 million effort to streamline the Bureau. There's consultation all over the country on streamlining. So we've reached out to meet with TIBIC and others on these budgetary issues, because some of the people that have talked to the commission have said, we don't know realistically with existing personnel within Interior, are we going to be able to fully implement this buyback program with a limited staff? At the same time, people are getting early retirement and buying out, so you're seeing agencies shrink from 10 staff down to 2. So those are the sort of challenges that the commission is really mindful of making those recommendations. And part of it too is this evaluation and assessment to look at knowing those past efforts, our testimonies that we've taken, but also the current state to make sure that our recommendations are very pointed, they're very reflective of the concerns right now in Indian country, and there's some thoughtful solutions that are based on what we've heard.
Let's go to John Barrett.
My name's John Barrett. I'm the chairman of the Paul Tribe in Eastern Oklahoma. I've been on this trust odyssey for a long time. I spent 5 years going to every title plant, every regional office. We went to maybe 70 or 80 agencies. And really, Stevie Wonder can just tell you what's wrong with it. There's not enough funding, and what's funding's there to run that. If you go back to all the studies, it's all the same things. Probate backlog, appraisals, communication. And it goes down to the fact that the local agencies don't get the funding to do the job that they're supposed to do. So first of all, I'm grateful to the chairwoman, because I really think their primary job is to restate the trust responsibility of the federal government. Because anybody that was involved with VAWA and now with this Indian child welfare issue, it all goes back to what people recognize as the responsibility of the United States to tribes. So we always have to keep going back and reminding new congressmen, new judges, the history and the reasons why there is this fiduciary and this trust responsibility. So I see that as their highest and greatest job. They just need to keep restating it. We need to restate it all the time, because people forget. We get new congressmen that don't understand why Indians want to protect their Indian women on their reservations. And the reasons behind that are embedded in the reasons that we are tribal governments and we're sovereign. So I applaud them. I just want them to come out with a great statement that's clear and people can understand it. And I think that's important. But I think what we really need to talk about on the next part is the recommendations. What do we do to make it work better? In the context of this buyback program, it's probate, it's appraisals, it's all the same old stuff. You got OST over here, you got BIA over here, they just don't communicate very well. You got trust officers on reservations that don't have any idea on really how the Bureau provides the trust relation to services. So I think what we need to start thinking about is how can we just focus part of the effort for Indian trust management to just be about the land and the resources? Why can't we just put appraisal and mineral assessment and all the functions of the trust, land management? All BIA is a bunch of apartment managers for Indians. They help us lease the money, they help us collect the money, they help us enforce the leases. We need to get away from separating all that out and focus this one portion of all of this trust responsibility to land management and resource management, and how can we use what limited funds Congress gives us to make it more efficient. And there's a lot of efficiencies that we can find. We don't need to have somebody in Albuquerque approving appraisals in Oklahoma that are done by a licensed appraiser. They're guided, they're limited, and they keep their license because they have audits of their appraisals. So we need to quit trying to keep them from all of these creating problems, to just find a way to separate, in child welfare, all the non-land issues into one segment of the Bureau: law enforcement, prisons, education, Indian child welfare, all the things that the Bureau helps us on the social service side. And we need to find a way that we quit splitting the baby up so far that it makes it impossible to make good use of what limited funds we have, and just focus on how do we get back to just being apartment managers for tribes and individuals, because that's really all they are. That's all they're supposed to do, is just help us manage the land, help us exploit the resources, help us manage those funds. So if we just one of my hopes is that they look at taking some of those functions back away from OST and still have OST do the oversight. But we need to start looking at a way to use the limited funding better to just manage these lands and these resources and these monies in a way that's more targeted, and we're not having to go all over the country to get simple things approved.
Excuse me, I'm going to do my joint presentation with John, if it's okay. And then Michelle, and then we probably do questions sort of collectively. Because time's running out. We have a little bit of extra time. We don't have to quit right at 4 o'clock. But we thought we'd go through the recommendations that NCAI has made to the Trust Reform Commission. We came and met with you in Seattle. It was, I think, in February or something like that. And then, oh, hey, that's right, it was Valentine's Day. So we made some recommendations, and I wanted to first start with, the Trust Reform Task Force, and we were all involved in that. And there have been lots of recommendations made on how to fix this. And we're actually not at the beginning of the process. We're kind of in the middle of the process when you look at it. If you look at, the 2008 presidential transition plan, we kind of took all the NCAI resolutions and every other recommendation, we all got together and we wrote out a plan for what the Obama administration ought to do to fix trust reform. And the first recommendation was that they ought to resolve the trust litigation, that was really a barrier. And a lot of progress has been made on that. The Cobell settlement has occurred, and now that is underway. A lot of tribal trust settlements, we're right in the middle of those. We made a recommendation that we should increase tribal land management authority and capacity. And the Hearth Act has passed now. It's now possible for tribes to manage leases themselves without having to get approval from the Department of Interior. That's still just now being implemented, and it doesn't apply to subsurface. But I thought it was interesting. We asked the Department of Interior, so what tribal codes have you approved? And they just sent them to us. Like, they've approved tribal codes. Tribes can now just approve their own leases under the Hearth Act. So So this is already starting, and you don't have to wait forever, apparently, on tribal codes. Hardthack just passed last July, I think, or somewhere in there, and they're already approving tribal codes already. Land consolidation was another one of the recommendations. There's now $1.9 billion that's about to be spent on land consolidation. So, at least on the first three things, we've made considerable progress. Michelle's sitting right here, but I have to bring up the next recommendation, which is to consolidate the Office of Special Trustee. That was always one of the recommendations. And the Office of Special Trustee was never intended to be a permanent institution. And then it's acquired a lot of the management functions for the accounting, the Office of Trust Funds Management and appraisals and other functions. Its original intention was to be more of an oversight or watchdog, but it's taken on a lot of different roles. And the interesting thing about the special trustee, it's done a pretty good job with a lot of things that they're doing. Of course, there's always some complaints, but a lot of improvements have been made as far as trust funds accounting, and some of the conflicts of interest with appraisals and other problems that they ran into along the way. But it's created some communication and management barriers that also need to be resolved in the long run. The separation, the audit and the accounting functions, we've made the recommendation consistently that those should be separated, that the Office of Special Trustee can't be both, the banker and the auditor. That the trust system's policies and procedures need to be updated. For example, appraisals. Why are we still providing appraisals for gift deeds? Good. There's lots of appraisals that don't need to be made anymore, and tries to make these recommendations repeatedly. And then, staffing and training and handbooks and all that kind of stuff that the offices need to do these functions. So you can see we've made a lot of progress in the first three, but on the as we work our way down the list, there's still a lot of things that need to be done. So this, the Cobalt Settlement and the Trust Reform Commission are kind of setting the stage for where we go next with this. The really active litigation was kind of holding us back from making changes, but maybe we're moving into the next stage now. The Indian Trust needs to continue making reforms, and President Obama has called for this smarter government. We've got a presidential administration that seems to be very interested in working with us, and we're actually getting some things done. So there's things we can do in the next 4 years. I wanted to put this up there. This was one of the results that we had out of the Trust Reform Task Force. I remember this is one of the documents produced collectively, because everybody was always asking, the trust management system, what are you talking about? And then the as-is to be produced a map that was like the size of the wall, a giant system. So we tried to produce a simplified map. And the title of this program is the Trust Triangle. There's it's pretty simple what's really going on here. There's a piece of property, a piece of Indian land, and it has some trust owners. And it might be owned by the tribe, it might be owned by 3,000 individual IAM account holders, but there's owners attached to that property. And then there's also potatoes or timber or something else going on that property. And it produces a lease or a transaction of some type. And then, that's handled by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. These first two parts of this, the property, the title, keeps track of ownership, that's all the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is reviewing and approving these leases. And you'll see lists of all the other functions that they have to do. It gets a lot more complicated, but we try to summarize some of that. The leases produce income, and that goes, it's over to the Office of Special Trustee, and then the money has to find its way back to the owners. And that's, in a sort of a simple sense, that's the trust system. It's a triangle. There's land, it produces money, and then it goes into an accounting system, and then it goes back to the owners. And that system has to function over and over again. And there's a lot of owners, and there's a lot of pieces of land out there. So this is a very simple diagram of an extremely complex system. But we wanted to some degree to focus on this. I think the Trust Reform Commission has been given, maybe their mission should have been more narrowly defined, because they've been asked to look at things like, what about the carcieri fix and the trust group responsibility for health care, and a lot of other stuff that's very, very important, but it's not this system, the money management and land management system within EDA and OST. So we wanted to spend maybe a little bit of time just focusing on this and some of the recommendations for how to go forward. Some steps are already underway. We started out, $1.9 billion. That's a substantial commitment of resources to buy back land and consolidating fractionated interests. The Hearth Act implementation is underway. They're working on the tribal trust lawsuits. Daryl Count is here. One of the best things I think they're doing is they're actively supporting land and trust acquisition, so that to try to deal with the checkerboard issue more and more. And they seem to be very interested in, we're looking for ways to increase production and economic development. And that's something that we've tried to emphasize, that the goal here is to get more money out of these lands, and so the tribes have more revenue. We suggested some short-term steps, that we need to create a process for a waiver of appraisals. That in the short term, that would be fairly easy. You know, where you have a sophisticated tribe that's done its own appraisals, like John Barry's tribe does. These are licensed appraisers or you have a gift deed, or you have any of a number of other transactions where you don't even need an appraisal. That would be, you know, one quick way would be to reform appraisal processes and make the whole system better. Tribal access to the title system is something the tribes have repeatedly requested. Some tribes already have access to the title systems. They have TAMS terminals right there. They can get access, they can conduct transactions, but other tribes can't get access to the title system, so it's really difficult to do this. Probate, at least in my experience, has this tendency, like we focus on it for a little while and then we forget about it for 8 years, and then we come back and we're like, oh yeah, there's a backlog, we gotta do something about probate. But you know, maybe once again, we need to check in on probate, check in on title as well. I didn't put that on here, but you know, check in on the title system and make sure things are working correctly. And then we probably got this from Daryl, but you know, training and handbooks. One of the things that's going on in Bureau Affairs is, you know, a lot of the staff is retiring and moving on. They're doing buyouts of like retirements, and you know, a lot of the institutional knowledge within the agencies of how to do stuff is retiring. Younger people are coming in, and they're going to need handbooks and manuals and training, and we have to be working on some of that stuff now so that we don't lose the institutional memory of these of the Bureau Affairs anyways. So moving on. The big thing the tribes have been asking for, though, really. Yes, go ahead, sir.
A couple of questions. The access to the TAMs, is that a region by region decision?
I don't know how you get access to TAMs. I mean, but I do. We
Because I'm
can.
not sure government tries to what they have access to.
I think the tribes in the contract, LTR goal, I think they have access.
We did a study a few years ago, and I think we found 8 tribes that had active access to TAMs. You got to request it, and there's a lot of security clearance and stuff like that. And some of the tribes in the Southwest have it, but it's very difficult to get access to the TAMS system. And you know, this is the tribe, and this is their lands, and this is the title system, and you would think they would get access to it, but it's pretty
I
hard.
think that we do in the Mountain Mouse region, it's even hard for the rural parts of gas, gas, getting working with the private. Train some tribes to have access to intelligence process.
Right, yes, ma'am.
I had talked to actually somebody from someplace in the department that does the TAMS training, and they have quit training because of the sequestration. I haven't heard yet when they're gonna reoffer that again, but you either have to have had 638 one of your programs to have access to it, or you have to have the BIA employees pull the data.
There's yet another reason to oppose the sequestration, because now you can't get training on the TAM system, so you can't get access to it. And then, you know, which is another one of the themes of this conference, which is sequestration is horrible, and it's starting, you know, we're starting to notice lots and lots of horrible things coming out of it. So that's, anyway, another reason to oppose sequestration. I want to get back to this point of increasing tribal authority so tribes can be more and more sympathist themselves. It's one of the things they've consistently asked for. And you know, planning for trust, you know, a lot of tribes have looked at this as a planning model, to try to have more active integrated planning systems so they can begin to take over the management themselves. Like I said, access to title records, more funding at the reservation level, 638 contractable, expanding self-governance and 638 contracting so tribes can do that, and implementation of the Hearth Act. We're also trying to push this energy bill that would allow tribes to do this with subsurface. You know, it's kind of, Hearth is a surface act, subsurface is a little more complicated, but there was legislation that passed the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs at the end of last year. We can't even get it reintroduced this year, so we're really trying to, I think right next door they're talking about that energy bill, but that's another thing we're trying to work on. You know, sunsetting the office of special trustee, like I said, Michelle's sitting right here. And it's a bad word. It's like the Department of Special Office Special Trustee. We don't like when they're going to go away. I don't really think that's the intention at all. And if you look at the legislation that's passed right now, the Simpson bill and the Crapo bill. It's interesting to note that both of these are Idaho bills. I would suggest to the Office of Special Trustee that you want to visit with the Idaho tribes and see what's going on with those guys, because they are very serious in Idaho about getting the Office of Special Trustee reorganized. And I know that at Coeur d'Alene, they are always on top of this issue. I don't know if Ernie Stenskar is here or Chief, but they've got a lot of concerns up there. I'm sure they would love to talk to you. But they've got legislation pending right now. And we've looked, the legislation is in some ways, it's the recommendations the tribes have been making for years. OST would sunset. It would create a deputy secretary for Indian Affairs. In some ways, we have an assistant secretary right now, but the deputy secretary would sit over other offices so that they could tell the BLM, oh yeah, you have to do that cadastral survey. Or they could tell it's not the Minerals and Management Service anymore. I don't know what they call it these days, but it's, whatever the new name is for the Minerals Office, or the other branches of the agency, but they would have some authority over there. There would be an integrated management structure, and that is also included in the legislation. The way it handles it's almost like the Office of Special Trustee. It doesn't go away. All those functions are still necessary, but it would be reintegrated back into a management structure. But here's the interesting thing about the legislation. It doesn't say how to do it, right? The legislation is just like, oh, the Secretary has the authority to reintegrate the Office of Special Trustee. And I thought that might be one of the most important things for the Commission is if you're going to reintegrate this thing back together, the Office of Special Trustee of European Affairs, how do you do that? What's it going to look like? And I don't know that the Commission has yet grappled with that, but that seems like maybe we need to make some recommendations around it. If the OST is going to sunset, how's that going to work? Or are we just going to leave that up to the Department of Interior to figure out for themselves, and they'll come up with BITAN or something like that? That's nobody ever. Like I said, this is these are the recommendations, and the recommendations are almost, it's like they're outlined in the legislation, but the meat and potatoes of the recommendations are still there. They're still not there. I went through the Office of Special Trustees budget justification for the coming year, and took a close look at it. And this is the organizational chart of the Office of Special Trustee, and it's when you look at the orders, they do a lot of very important stuff at the Office of Special Trustee, and it needs to keep happening, it needs to keep going. If you look at the organizational chart, the one part of the tribes that you really not like is the Office of Appraisal Services being where it is. And I think there's another valuation office for the entire Department of Interior. It may need to be that the valuation overall within Interior needs to be considered as a whole. It seems kind of weird that non-Indian land gets valued one way and Indian land gets valued a different way, and that maybe we need to think about how those things fit together. I think the concern has always been, and one of the reasons it's here is because you can protect its budget, right? And if you move it over into the Bureau of Indian Affairs, its budget tends to get cannibalized by other very important things that the Bureau of Indian Affairs does. But we need to think about how that would work. The Office of Historical Accounting, there's this tendency to think that the Office of Historical Accounting is going to start to fade away because the trust litigation is winding up. There's actually a lot of trust litigation still pending, and I tend to think that the Office of Historical Accounting has been playing an extremely important role in all of the settlements that have been developed so far, and they're going to continue for a while. That we're going to need that Office of Historical Accounting to continue to work on continued settlements and that work. And then the rest of the offices, I basically divided into two parts. The Deputy Special Trustee in Field Operations, they've got trust officers out in the field all over the country, and they play an important role. But I think there's questions there about how they fit together with Bureau of Indian Affairs and how that management structure might work in the future as far as field offices that the Office of Special Trustee now has. And then the rest of these three offices, and Michelle probably knows a lot more about this than I do, the Deputy Special Trustee for Trust Services, the Deputy Special Trustee for Program Management, and the Special Trustee for Business Management. All of these, as far as I can tell, are largely related to the management of trust funds and accounting, and there's a lot of very important functions going on here. And if we just got rid of them, it would just be like the Cobell lawsuit all over again. You can't just get rid of trust funds management. Those are extraordinarily important functions. And when you look at it, the budget really isn't all that big for those offices. $70 million. And that's a function that I think we're going to need to figure out how to continue to protect and keep it very functional so that the goal here isn't to create a system, have a really great definition of the trust responsibility with perfect accountability so they can screw it up and we can sue them over and over and over. I mean, the goal really is to have the leases done correctly and the payments made correctly to the right ownership, and so that there wouldn't be a need for the litigation, that people would get the benefit of their lands and of the money provided by the lands. So that's at least something I think we need to start thinking about is in the future, something's going to happen to the Office of Special Trustee, and tribes may want to be involved in what those recommendations look like. Tribes tend to think of the system as a whole, so I just went back to the trust triangle. The system works together in this, it goes in a loop, right? You have land, it develops money goes into an account, and the account goes back to the individual. And somehow the management system needs to take account of all of this and not just one part of it. Anyway, I don't know if there's, Michelle Singer is here, and she's the Active Union Special Trustee. She knows a lot about this. I don't know if she wants to comment on this or maybe just take questions or for discussion. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, just so many people know, my name is Joanne Spotted Bear, and I am what you're supposed to say in the book. I woke up. Let me told me I am the descendant of the Little Bighorn, the Wounded Knee Massacre, World War I, World War II. 1973, my father was a cop. At that time, he could have killed any A member he chose, and he didn't. My dad put his gun down and walked off his job. Today, I am a law advocate. I was a law advocate in Pine Ridge for 2 years. I am a law advocate in Reno Sparks Indian Colony, Ballard Fighting Shoshone Tribe, assistant judge for Winnemucca. Order 7 trailers, a guy selling dope, and there is nobody there to help the Winnemucca people. And we have the sales of Wounded Knee, 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre site. I hear you talking real fancy talk in front of our grassroots people here. A lot of them are educated. But how come you don't talk about the 1783 treaty, where it says that if something belongs to us, we get it back? That's in Article 7. It goes back to the state or the person. The 1622 Saponi Treaty, 1851 Fort Loramie Treaty, where the Teton Treaty Council and the Dakota Nation of the Black Hills are going toe-to-toe in world court. One's trying to save the government while the other one's trying to save the people. You tell us about this money here. The 5% rich, Dexter Yeager, Huey Packard, Alan Pease, Robert Kiyosaki. They say the 8th grade dropout becomes a multi-millionaire, law-breaking advice, and that college is made for suckers. Are we suckers to you? Because technically speaking, land is not for sale around the world. That camera that you're looking at right there, those videos, I talked to a guy in the United Nations the last 3 days, and I've been sending him information about Pine Ridge. Pine Ridge has $2.64 billion of embezzlement, 2 land documents, a 344 and a 344N. We never knew about the N number. The XL pipeline, none of the grassroots Lakota knew about the XL pipeline coming through Pine Ridge. When you talk about buying our land and selling it, you say you abide by laws. You say that your utmost respect call Yerma Fides. You abide by the Bible. In the Bible, even the Constitution says in the Bible as a treaty that thou shalt not steal. You're stealing from our people by lying to them. I word this specifically so you can know for yourself that as Leviet Chum told me, Chuck Bell, killed all of their relatives, but you didn't kill them, every single one of them. 300 men, women, and children who were died, or who got murdered, slaughtered in your words, and one baby who sat inside of the gravesite. We have sacred sites, sacred lands, from California all the way to New York, Montana, all the way to Texas, Hawaii, Micronesia, and Belize. Land is not for sale. When are you going to tell the truth about that part? What will it take for you to tell the truth? What do we have to do? Eventually, one day, we'll all be dead, and then you can have the land and do whatever you want with it. But until that day comes, we deserve to be told the truth. And that money, it's ours. It's already ours. But the grassroots people, I was just telling my adopted sister that I met, I have oil, gas, electricity on my land in Fort Peck. And I don't even get a dime out of it. I don't see nothing. So I just wanted to share like that. Who's getting rich off of it?
Thank you very much. That's what this chart is about, is that money from your land getting back into your account, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So that money goes to the owners of the land, the Indian people and the tribes that own the land. Next question, Ms. Moore.
It's taken me 20 years to get my parents come back, and I haven't been there. So when I call the VIA, they tell me that they need that I need to call the Office of Creating Appeals. Or if I call OST, they tell me I gotta go to the VIA. And it just seems all the time, it's the service of it. And that's what this house now. And now we're looking at this buyback program, while our land is in fraction. Private aid, probates are not being done. And we have all these agencies that are put together for us, individuation, and then you hear conversations about everything's tribes, everyone's for the tribes. But without us individual Indians, there won't be, there are no tribes, we are tribes. So what is this going to do for me? Who's going to resolve my issue? How is it going to do that?
It's a great question, and I was looking at this chart, and one of the interesting things about the field operations, and what's that telephone center that you guys have created at the office? The Trust Beneficiary Center. What's interesting about that is that they have this Trust Beneficiary Center, and if you have questions about your account, that you can call them.
I called the trust beneficiaries several times to tell them that my grandfather is on there, he's dead, and they got him unlisted as unknown, and I still can't.
But one of the difficult things about that, and what I think one of the interesting is the Trust Beneficiary Center, they really can answer questions about your accounts really very well. And if they have questions about probate, I'm guessing they probably have difficulty answering that question. How does that work? If they have a question about something that's maybe in the Bureau of Indian Affairs or in the Office of Indian Affairs and Appeals, how does that get managed?
Actually, most of those questions we can't answer, which is the point. The call center has access to the ProTrack, to information from TAMS, to information from TFAS, so they can provide information about the money in your account, the status of your probate, as well as the status of a lease or your land. And the job is, and we can speak to the individual and take particular information, is that if that can't be answered based on access to the system they have right there, they go find it out and respond to the individual, so that it's supposed to be, and it is, in the vast majority of instances, the one stop that you have to make rather than get the runaround.
So maybe, and we would have to think about this a lot, but maybe one of the answers is that the beneficiary call system shouldn't just be for OST, it should also apply to they would have access to your Bureau of Indian Affairs information and your Office of Indian Appeals information, and if you have BLM matters going on, they'd have access to everything